Hello, welcome to the interview on France 24. I'm Catherine Nicholson. Today we're meeting a man who just a couple of years ago was Deputy Prime Minister of the UK, but who today is standing firmly against the British government on one key issue that will shape the future of Britain and Europe for years to come. That issue is, of course, Britain's exit from the European Union. And our guest is Nick Clegg. Thank you very much for being with us.
Good to be with you.
Well, first of all, we've spoken to you before about trying to stop Brexit. You are still supporting quitting Brexit. At this point, there's less than a year to go. Do you not think perhaps it's a little bit too late?
No, I don't think anything is too late. And I think we should always retain, as an ancient, venerable old democracy, the freedom to change our minds. That is, after all, the lifeblood of any democracy. That's why we have elections every few years, precisely so that people can change their minds as circumstances change. And I think what is starting to become more and more obvious to more and more people, regardless of however they voted 2 years ago, is that the world has changed so much over the last couple of years. Not only, of course, have none of the promises of a Brexit utopia materialised, the £350 million promised for the National Health Service every week and so on, but crucially, Donald Trump has become US president. He's threatening trade wars left and right and centre. There's real worries about Russian influence in Europe. There's great insecurity about cross-border crime. So I think the world around us has changed, and I think it is important that we continue to retain the fundamental democratic right to change our mind as a country in view of the fact that the world around us is changing too.
Well, in terms of public support for a Brexit U-turn, the polls are not showing any clear picture. Do you feel that there is clear evidence that the public, considering all of those circumstances you just mentioned, would change their mind if put to a second vote?
Well, of course, you never know until the public have their say. But my sense is that, of course, if you ask people, were you wrong to vote, either Remain or Brexit, most people go, no, I wasn't right. I wasn't wrong. I'm absolutely right. I'm going to stick to my view. If you then ask people slightly more illuminating questions. So, for instance, ask people whether they think Brexit is good or bad for the NHS. At the time of the referendum, there was a majority of people saying it was good for the NHS. Now there's a significant majority of people saying it's bad for the NHS. And given, frankly, the serial incompetence with which the British government has been handling the Brexit negotiations, I think even the most hardline Brexit voters will now accept that Brexit is more complicated, more drawn out, and less beneficial to the country than they were told by Michael Gove, Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage and the others at the time of the referendum in the summer of 2016.
Well, there's lots of talk, of course, about all sorts of aspects of Brexit, customs union, single market, terms that, frankly, having grown up in Britain, we never used to really talk about. People don't necessarily have a great handle on these things. If you were to leave the jargon behind, just speak to a British Leave voter, what sort of 3 concrete reasons would you give them about their life, why their life would be worse after Brexit?
Things will be more expensive in the shops, obviously. The more you put barriers to trade, the more expensive things that we import end up being in the shops. Fewer job opportunities because, of course, investment goes down and fewer new jobs are created through outside investors. And thirdly, I think we become a less safe country. So much of crime, so much of cross-border terrorism is now something which stretches across the whole of the European continent. And to pull ourselves out of the crime-fighting and anti-terrorism measures in the EU seems to me to cause great risk. So prices more expensive, fewer jobs and less safety.
On the security aspect, that's an interesting one because, of course, a big motivation for many people in voting to leave was immigration, having greater control of our borders. And we have just seen an attack in Belgium. People very worried about that kind of thing coming across the English Channel. Leave voters might well say, well, if we've got greater control of our borders, then that actually makes us safer.
If only it was as simple as that. The Brexit campaigners said at the time of the referendum that if people were to vote for Brexit, we would be able to somehow seal off our borders, have greater control of our borders. Actually, what's going to happen is something quite different. Firstly, a new land border between the United Kingdom and the European Union is being created that didn't exist before in the island of Ireland, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And now those same Brexiteers who said they wanted to control our borders are falling over themselves to say that they want to keep that border open. So far from having greater control of our borders, we're creating new borders and then actually refusing to control them. And so I think the more that people see that all of those commitments and all of those glib promises that somehow pulling out of the European Union would allow us to, hermetically seal ourselves off from the outside world, they're simply not coming true.
Oh, you mentioned the Irish border there. It's a massive issue in the negotiations. There doesn't seem to be any firm solution being offered at the moment. Of course, if the border were to be moved into the Irish Sea, so to speak, so there was still an invisible border on the island of Ireland, that's, we've been told, a red line for the DUP, which is the party supporting Theresa May. Is this Irish border issue big enough to actually perhaps compromise Theresa May's government?
Well, yes, it is, because it is Theresa May herself. No one else has created this problem. She herself has said on behalf of her government, I guarantee, she said, that there will not be any additional checks, no friction, no additional delays on this crucial and very politically sensitive border between the Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And what the Irish government in Dublin, reasonably enough, is saying is, OK, well, show us how you're going to do that. To which the answer from Theresa May is, I don't quite have the answer yet, but I might come up with it in the future. And in the meantime, don't worry, if I don't come up with an answer, I will do something called the backstop, which, to cut through all the jargon, basically means keeping things as they are.
Do you think that there could, in fact, be, well, could the DUP pull out of the government and perhaps even provoke an early election?
I think anything is possible at the moment. British politics has become so polarised, angry, and febrile that anything could happen. But the fundamental problem has not been invented in Brussels, invented in Dublin, or invented by people like me who don't like Brexit. I'm afraid this is a problem entirely of the government's own making. The Brexiteers promised a utopia to the British people. They're now unable to deliver that utopia, including perfectly sort of closed borders. And they're now thrashing around trying to blame everybody else. They're blaming the governor of the Bank of England. They're blaming civil servants. They're blaming Michel Barnier. They're blaming other governments. At the end of the day, the blame for the mess that the United Kingdom finds itself in can be squarely and fairly placed at the door of the government itself.
Well, let's move on to an event that's going to be coming up in the next couple of weeks, actually on the anniversary of the referendum back in 2016. It's called The People's Vote. There's going to be an event taking place in London. I know that you're taking part in this campaign. Can you tell us a bit more about it? I
think the idea is that several campaign groups, and the details haven't yet been finalised, including my involvement, but I think the idea is a very good one, which is that 2 years on from the referendum, there are lots and lots of individuals, there are lots of families, lots of communities, there are lots of campaign groups, there are lots of trade unions, there are lots of political parties and people across political parties who want to register their discontent with the way in which this government is, in this very haphazard way, driving the country towards the cliff edge of a botched Brexit. And so I think it will be the right occasion, 2 years after the referendum, for thousands and thousands of people to take to the streets, not only of London, but of other British cities, hopefully, to mark that occasion. Well, some people just hearing the name, as you said, the details not finalised, but some people hearing the name People's Votes, they might just say, the people have already had a vote. It was called the referendum. Why are we trying to have another vote or try and overturn this? So it's not a vote on the initial question. It's a vote on a new question. When we know what the reality and what the details of Brexit really entail, it seems to me, at least, and to many other people, just to be logical to allow that decision to be taken, whether we proceed with that kind of Brexit, to be taken by the voters, not by politicians. Is that not the role of members of Parliament, though, as the representatives of the people? Well, oddly enough, it's Brexit-supporting members of Parliament like David Davis and John Redwood and others who always used to advocate a two-step process, that you bookend the whole process. Firstly, you ask the British people, do you want to leave? To which the answer was by a very narrow majority, yes. And then you go back to the British people and say, do you want to leave in this particular way? And there's a huge distance to travel between one decision and the next. And I think it's right to always put the people in charge, not always the politicians. All right, well, just looking back at the campaign itself, of course, in recent weeks, we've had lots of talk about Cambridge Analytica, about pro-Trump forces that are actually proven to have intervened on the Leave side of the campaign. Some people saying that this proof should actually invalidate the referendum result. Do you agree with that? I think a lot of allegations and counter-allegations are made about the activities of organisations like Cambridge Analytica and indeed by some of the campaign groups, and notably the allegations of serious overspending by some of the pro-Brexit groups. I don't at the moment think that it amounts to sort of sufficient evidence to say that the whole result was invalid. For me, what has already actually been invalidated, and is perhaps much more important, is that all the commitments made to the British people about what Brexit would bring to the British people have already been shown to be false, whether it is all the promises of smaller class sizes, lower taxes, perfectly controlled immigration control borders, extra money for the health service. We don't need to do any further research, and we don't need to hear from Cambridge Analytica to know that all the promises made to the British people, all of them about Brexit, have turned out to be false.
OK, well, thank you very much for your time. Unfortunately, we have run out of time here for this interview, but thanks for coming in to see us. Nick Clegg, former British Deputy Prime Minister, here on France 24. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon. You can watch this programme once again on our website, france24.com.